Hello, and welcome to part 3 of our CANDIDA series. My name is Dr. Nicola Ducharme, and I am the co-creator of the CANDIDA solution, which is a course that we're just launching that's all about Candida overgrowth and your health, your digestive health, your family's health, everything you could want to know about that. So, we have been covering a couple of topics this week. So if you haven't caught the first couple, make sure to go back and do those. But we've been talking about Candida diets. We've been talking about Candida overgrowth and kind of other issues that may be going on in the gut, in the digestive system that predispose to Candida overgrowth. And today I'm going to be talking about Candida in children. So let's just jump right in. So let's go back to the very, very beginning, okay? So we're going to talk about children, but let's just take a couple of minutes to talk about fertility and pregnancy and kind of back to where it all begins. So we do know that there is some association between Candida overgrowth and infertility. I'll be quite honest with you. When I went to look at the research, the actual data on that, studies, there wasn't much to be found. And so if you're someone who needs scientific studies to back up every single thing, I don't have a lot to offer you there, but I certainly have some solid information if we think through mechanisms and how the body works. Things we do know, we just don't have data about how, like epidemiologically, how it impacts, the population. But we do know that Candida can change the pH of the vagina and of the cervical area. And that can have an impact on the sperm's ability to travel and survive well and get to the egg to fertilize, which is of course what we want to happen if we're looking for a baby. The other connection is the Candida overgrowth, if it is more vaginal, which means it's more systemic, not just in the gut, can lead to changes in the cervical mucus. And so if cervical mucus becomes more sticky, more agglutinated, then it's harder for the sperm to penetrate through and get, into the uterus, which is where they need to get. So there are a couple of connections there that make sense. The other thing is Candida overgrowth in a male may influence their sperm production and sperm quality and motility. So there can be a male connection on the fertility one as well. And basically we know that anything that causes inflammation in the body can impact fertility. So we know that Candida can influence fertility. Some of the mechanisms are not 100% clear, but I think it is fair to say that there is a relationship there. The other thing that we see relating to fertility treatments is, a lot of high dose hormones being given, and that can predispose one to Candida overgrowth as well, especially high progesterone. And so we have a lot of women now who are being given progesterone in their first trimester of pregnancy. Potentially they've had miscarriages in the past or low progesterone levels on their labs. And progesterone can, again, predispose to Candida overgrowth. So in pregnancy, it's hard because women are more prone to Candida issues, but of course there's less that one can do about Candida issues during pregnancy. So it becomes very important if a couple knows that they're going to be trying to get pregnant, and a woman knows, and both female and male, to be honest, know that they have issues around Candida, it's worth treating that first, so that firstly, it doesn't influence their ability to get pregnant. Secondly, it doesn't get worse throughout pregnancy, and then, there's far fewer options to treat it. So if you know that's coming down the pike and you've got Candida issues, hit it hard before you get pregnant, so that, you don't have to worry about it so much during. During pregnancy, like I said, we do have limited options. So, there are certain things like garlic and caprylic acid and things like that that can be safe. Taking high dose, high quality probiotics, of course, is always a good idea, and that's recommended during pregnancy. But some of the traditional herbs that we know are really good antifungals, some of the medications that we use are just not considered safe in pregnancy. So that's why I'm saying, preempt it. treat candida and try and get it under control before pregnancy. And then even though during pregnancy, it's not so good to restrict all carbohydrates because you definitely need energy. You're growing a human being. But it is good to be really strict about the refined sugars and things like that, just so you're not making the situation worse with your diet. So then we go through pregnancy and then we get to the question of the birth. What's interesting is there are so many more babies born via cesarean section now or C-section than ever before. And I find this a really interesting phenomenon, and I could go off on a whole other tangent about that. But just as it relates to our topic today, we want to look at a couple of things here. One is, the microbiome of the mom throughout the pregnancy in general is important, and that's why promoting good, flora and things like that in her gut. But in the actual birth process, babies get seeded with their mother's flora as they're moving through the birth canal. And so that helps with their own microbiome. It helps them to colonize their good gut bacteria. And that's, another miracle of nature's design. But because so many babies are born via C-section, they're just not getting that colonization. And so I feel that it's important, if a baby is born by C-section, to be giving that baby neonatal probiotics or infant probiotics. And these are available from a couple of really reputable companies. I've used one by Pharmax, is a good one. Claire Labs has one. But they're specially designed for infants, for newborns, and they're really easy to give. They always come in a powder form. So for a woman who's nursing, she can just put her finger in the bottle, or the dad or a caregiver, whoever, put the finger in the bottle and the baby will just suck the probiotic powder right off it. Babies that are getting milk in a bottle, it can be added to the bottle. But it's pretty easy either way to get that into a little baby. And so those probiotics are specifically designed for infants that small and that young. So then moving on to the first couple of years of childhood, one of the things that we see a lot is this sort of multiple antibiotics and kids getting multiple ear infections. And ear infections, if a child has an ear infection and they're screaming and holding their ear and pulling their ear and they've got fevers, and, of course, as a parent, you want and need to relieve that. So there are some natural options that may be helpful to relieve some of the discomfort, may even do the trick if the infection is more mild. But a lot of the time it does graduate to requiring antibiotics. And you need to treat the infection, you need to get the child out of pain. What I would suggest, though, is if you have a child who is having recurrent ear infections, to look closely at their diet, or if they're still being breastfed, look at your diet, because I don't know what the number is, I'm making this up out of my head, like 6 times out of 10 perhaps, the ear infections can be dramatically reduced, if not eradicated, by adopting a dairy-free diet. There's a strong connection between dairy in the diet and ear infections in the child. And so that's just something that's really, I'm not going to say it's easy, it's simple, it's not necessarily easy. But if a mom's nursing, to do a trial of removing dairy from her diet, or if the child's a little older or not nursing, removing dairy from the kid's diet. And I can't even tell you how many stories I have heard where parents have said, oh yeah, I stopped giving them dairy, and oh my gosh, didn't have any ear infections after that. Okay, so dairy is very mucus producing. It has a really strong impact on the respiratory system, on the ears, eyes, nose, mouth, throat, and even the breathing. So it's definitely worth looking at food sensitivities in the younger kids. And really from the age of 2, we can get reliable food sensitivity testing. Their immune system is developed enough to register with antibodies. When they're really little, it's more just doing a therapeutic trial. And obviously sometimes we just opt to do a therapeutic trial anyway, regardless of the age of the child. So when we're looking at Candida overgrowth in children, we definitely want to look back to their birth and say, were they vaginally delivered or were they C-section? either way, it doesn't hurt to give the neonatal probiotics. But if they're C-section babies, then that's even more of an indicator to do that. And then trying to minimize the antibiotics that they receive as, young children. So, ear infections is just one thing. We've got strep throat, we've got tonsillitis, we've got a whole lot of different things. But many of them can be circumvented with some dietary modification and then just some simple immune strengthening. So I'm a big fan of essential oils. I remember when my little daughter started preschool, and it was so dramatic. My husband and I both saw it so clearly. If we put, and we use On Guard, we love that blend, sort of immune protective blend. If we put a couple of drops of On Guard on her feet every morning before she went off to preschool, she stayed well. And if we slacked off and didn't do it, she picked up all the germs and came home with the colds and coughs and sniffles and whatever else was going around. So there's some things that you can do to strengthen your child's immune system overall. Elderberry syrup is another one that's great. Astragalus is a good immune tonic. Liposomal vitamin C is really good as an immune strengthener. And I'll give a quick plug here because I just love it so much. Research Nutritionals, which is one of my favorite brands of supplement producers, makes a liposomal C that is vanilla caramel flavored. And I gotta tell you, I don't eat sweets or desserts or anything. I've just trained myself off it. That to me is a treat. It's not sickly sweet. It's not really gooey. It's just a nice consistency and just the right amount of sweet. And I know some parents use that actually to hide herbs. If they're giving herbs to their kid, they actually put the herbs in the vitamin C or the glutathione in with the vitamin C to mask the flavor. But the liposomal CRLA is what it's called by Research Nutritionals, is fantastic. And it's pretty easy to get into kids because it tastes so good. So that's basically prevention, like strengthening their immune system. So a little bit of On Guard on the feet. You can use elderberry syrup, especially in winter season for colds and flus, and liposomal vitamin C. They're just a couple of things that we use around our house, and to try and keep the children well. Because if you can keep your kids well, keep them from getting those, viruses that can turn into secondary bacterial infections that can lead to antibiotic use, then you're one step ahead in preventing the antibiotic use, preventing the yeast overgrowth before it even happens. So what do we see as symptoms of Candida overgrowth in in babies and in children? Well, diaper rash certainly can have a fungal element. And one of the ways that we have circumvented that in the past is a spray bottle with a combination of melaleuca, lavender, and frankincense essential oils, obviously heavily diluted. It's a spray bottle with water, and I used to put 10 drops of each in like a 4-ounce bottle, I think it was, and then fill the rest up with water. I've seen that work dramatically on very, very stubborn diaper rashes. Kids can get rashes anywhere on their skin, but especially in the folds of their skin, right? So you picture little chubby little babies, their folds everywhere. So they can be red rashes under their arms, in their groin, on their feet. And that can be an indicator that they have Candida overgrowth. They can get a white coating on their tongue, which is obviously an indicator for anyone, but that's an easy thing to look out for in kids. And then obviously digestive issues. So gas, bloating, loose stools, kind of floaty, fluffy stools, sometimes flecks in the stool, like little grains, almost looks kind of like sand. And some kids will actually manifest with constipation. More frequently, it's more the other way. It's more loose stools and even some like explosive diarrhea. But, the Candida overgrowth can definitely impact their digestion and elimination. The other thing I see in children is a very strong impact on their behavior and on their cognition and on their, development overall. And so I work a lot with kids on the autism spectrum and kids, with developmental delay or ADHD, like wherever on that spectrum. And Candida is something that comes up time and time again. And it's the first thing I look for when I'm working with kids. The first thing is, look at their diet. Do they need to be restricting gluten, dairy? We do food sensitivity testing. We do a trial of the gluten-free, dairy-free diet, and often soy-free as well. And we want to look at how much sugar they're eating. But their behaviors and what their parents are describing can be a really close reflection of what's happening for them. So it's typical with Candida to see this sort of drunk, giggly kind of behavior, like silliness, just busting out in giggles for apparently no reason, like being a little goofy, you know, sort of off center, and kind of like what you'd picture someone looking like if they'd had too much alcohol to drink. And it's not that far off, because Candida does produce these acetaldehydes, which are like an alcohol-like substance. But that's a common manifestation. I do see some kids who get more aggressive, who get more defiant, sometimes self-injurious. But that's probably the minority for me. But if that's your child's picture, I certainly wouldn't rule out Candida being a problem. I'd be looking at Clostridia overgrowth and things like that as well. So the way I like to assess that in kids is with a urine test called the microbial organic acid test, and a comprehensive stool analysis. And between those two gives me a really strong sense of what's going on in the child. And they're a urine and a stool test, so it doesn't require a blood draw. So that's kind of ideal too. So kids on the spectrum who have had multiple antibiotics as children are very, very, very high risk for Candida problems. But even kids with neurological challenges who haven't had antibiotics still seem to be more prone. And so I'm not exactly sure why that has come about. Or if it's just a product of all the inflammatory stresses in their gut. But that's just the fact of it. I tend to see Candida overgrowth in kids like that. In terms of treating kids, the things that we use are sort of fairly similar to what we use for adults. We obviously just adjust dosage for age and size. And some of the choices, it depends on if a child's able to swallow pills or not, depends on how gross something tastes. I feel like things like grapefruit seed extract and some of the more bitter herbs are really hard to get into children. So I don't use so much of those. I do use a lot of biocidin because it's a really effective herbal blend, but it has a slight sweetness to it. But the other thing I use a ton in children is compounded nystatin liquid. And so nystatin is a prescription. It's a prescription antifungal. But what's good about it is it doesn't get absorbed systemically. So it doesn't put any stress on the liver. It doesn't go through the bloodstream. So that's one of the advantages of it, because it's very low toxicity and very good safety record. The disadvantage of that is it's really only working in the gut. It doesn't work throughout the whole body. And so it depends on how systemic we think an issue is, or nystatin can be partnered with another herbal blend that does go more through the bloodstream. The important thing with nystatin, though, is to get it compounded. So commercial nystatin does come in a liquid, but it's junk. It's got sugars in it, which seems ironic. It's got colorings in it, flavor. It's just, ugh. So I only use the compounded, and compounding pharmacies that make this liquid nystatin can then make it to whatever potency we're looking for, and can flavor it with stevia so that it's sweet and tastes good and easy to get into children, but it doesn't provide the sugar and the artificial colors and flavors and things like that. If kids can swallow pills, then that sort of leads to a few other options. And older children can do things like oil of oregano and grapefruit seed extract in a capsule form. But for younger kids, that's going to be an uphill battle unless you've got a kid that's just really willing to take anything at all. So what else did I want to tell you today? We've covered what symptoms may look like for children with Candida overgrowth. We've covered some dietary things. Obviously, the key is the amount of sugar the child is getting. And that can be hard to monitor, especially once they're in school. My little girl's in kindergarten now, and we've got birthday parties every weekend, and there's cake and cookies, and she's not much of a sweet eater, but I see some of these kids just like hoeing into this food. On Fridays, they get a treat at school, and oh God, it just goes on. So really trying to regulate that in your child is going to be number one. Looking out for their food sensitivities. If they have any neurological issues, I can't tell you how profound the gluten casein-free diet has been for a lot of children I work with, probably up there in the top 3 interventions. But Candida overgrowth is a big one too. That's one that I've seen a lot, and I am assessing for right up front when I start working with a new family, and really work to remediate sooner rather than later. So that wraps up our 3-part series. I would like to invite you to take our free questionnaire if you haven't done so already. We'll put the link in the comments. But if you're wondering about, whether Candida overgrowth may be causing some health issues for you or a family member, that would be the ideal place to start. And as I said, we have just released the Candida Solution, which is a great comprehensive course that talks about all the kinds of things I've been talking about the last 3 days, plus a lot more. So we'll put that direct link in the comments as well. And it's been a pleasure being here with you these past 3 days. I hope that you have learned something valuable from this information that you can apply and that will improve the health of your family. All the very best. I will see you again soon.